Welcome everyone to today's Resource YYC Lunch and Learn. Today we have our special guest, Pauline Greenidge. And so I hope you all enjoy this session. If you're not aware, Resource YYC is a co-working space for professionals in downtown Calgary. And we try and do this as part of our community events. So we hope you get a lot out of it, and hope that the learning opportunity is great for everyone. And we also provide private offices, dedicated desks, drop-in services, and virtual office options. So if you're ever in need of those, come check us out. All right, over to you, Pauline.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Rosemary. Good morning and welcome, everyone. As Rosemary mentioned, my name is Pauline Greenidge, and I like to say that I'm in the people investment business. And I want to thank you for taking the opportunity to share some ideas. And we will do that together today and hopefully engage in a conversation that matters. But before I start, I do want to acknowledge that I'm here in Calgary, and we are here today on Treaty 7 land, which is the traditional home of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Tsuut'ina First Nation, and of course, the traditional home of the Métis Region 3 people. So, a little bit more about me before we hop into this idea of setting the table for re-engagement. My consulting practice is Upward HR, and my background, functional expertise for the last 20 plus years has been in that area. And I called it Upward HR because upward is about motion, and it sounds better than downward HR. But it's really not about the traditional HR that you might be thinking of, like from the office or something. The differentiator here is, in my work, the R stands for human relationships, human resilience, and human reinvention. And those three R's are really genuinely, authentically part of my personal journey, but also based on what I've observed as a HR practitioner over the last 20 plus years as being really important. And, you know, the power of relationship, resilience, and the opportunity to reinvent ourselves has actually never been more important than today. Oh, there we go. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. I didn't check that, but I'm hoping you can see what's on the screen. So how is setting a table connected to the return to the workplace, or people having returned to a different kind of workplace? You might be asking yourself, what is she going to tell me today? You know, years ago, I published a book called A Grand Dinner Party, Setting the Table for Engagement Through Mergers and Acquisition. And that was focused on really managing the employee experience through big corporate disruptions like the one I went through. And I talk about moving from a focus of working just on the transactional stuff and being in a transactional way to thinking about the opportunity to work in a transformed workplace, which is what, you know, we're usually doing when we're in a merger, an acquisition, a downsizing, or even just a corporate restructuring that many of us have been experiencing over the last little while. And so I use the analogy of a dinner party really to help illustrate the importance of moving from that state of just focusing on the transactional pieces to making the transformation become real. And connection and belonging are really critical success factors to help employees manage through things like that. And the same applies to this return to the workplace that many of us have already experienced for a number of months or are starting to experience now. And so I thought it was valuable to really think about it in this way. And even if you've already returned to the office as an employee, a leader of a team, or leader of an organization, you have to have a plan, right? We need to create the invite. Who's coming back? Be a good host. How do you bring them back? Or if you've brought them back, are you being a good host? And then setting the table. What are we actually coming back to? And what are your people experiencing? And this is really important because the world of work has changed. And it's been changing for a while, but there's sort of 5 key ways that the world continues to change. Globalization. Many of us work in that environment already with offices everywhere. Mobilization, we've seen that happen over the last 2 years because we can work from where we need to work from, not just an office. We still have changing demographics, and that's been going on for the last at least 15 years. We've got boomers, Gen Xers like myself, even though nobody talks about us that much, millennials, and now Gen Z, right? All working together. So that creates a different workplace. And in addition to that, we have technology and different behaviors that create a changing kind of workplace, and then you sprinkle in this global pandemic and some changing societal values and propositions, and the workplace just becomes a different space. If you think about it, we are living in a historical time, some of which we may or may not see the likes of again. But this idea of going back to the office as the way things were might feel comfortable and even nostalgic, but it's not really likely to happen. And so in the context of employees and who've either come back or are coming back in some fashion, whether it's through hybrid, full-time, whatever it is in your organization, we're in the middle of a big change. And today's topic is really just to help you, whether you're an individual, a leader, or a senior executive, recognize and question, are you ready for this different kind of change we're living in? And at the organizational level, there really needs to be a management commitment and some readiness for what it can look like over time, even if your people have been back for a while. A question that organizational leaders should be thinking about is what actually will cause people to be disengaged? We're going to talk about re-engagement, but have you thought about what actually disengages people in your organization, not even just in general, in your organization? If you're leading a team, you may have been trying to keep people together for a period of time, and now you're together and you're still working through new expectations or different expectations. And there's an impact on your team and the dynamics of your team. And what about new employees that you've brought on perhaps while you were working hybrid or even while you were working remotely, who haven't had the same onboarding and orientation experiences that you would have traditionally? And you might be saying, well, how do I manage the new employees, or how can I and my team work differently? And if you're here today as an individual, you might be thinking, well, it's a new way of being, this schedule. Remember when we all had to start working from home? It took some time to adjust. The technology was there, but how we worked with each other and balancing being at home with our families, our significant others, our pets, whatever it is, took some time to adjust, right? And the same applies to returning to a different workplace. And so this is just about being prepared. What am I returning to? Recently I talked with a senior leader, and they have a large team and lead leaders, and they were saying, our folks have been back in the office for a while, and they're here and they're working, but I'm not sure they're that engaged. And this was a little bit of a surprise to him. And I spoke, also with an employee that I touch base with often here and there. And she mentioned that during her time working remotely, her leader had only contacted her and had 2 one-on-ones with her in 2 years. And as she's returned to a hybrid working schedule, this leader now is micromanaging and connecting, wanting to know all the time. So very uneven. So it's important to understand the value of re-engaging people in a way that makes sense. And what I've observed working with my clients corporately and individually is that companies are good at being compliant. What are the rules, the regulations, the schedules, and policies and procedures of coming back to hybrid or a different kind of workplace? But they're really actually not enough to reintegrate, to re-energize, and to retain employees. And so the question is, how do you get truly ready to return to a different workplace? And how do you get employees to do that, even if they've been back for a while? So the slide that I have here is a visual, really just to say, where are we in this context of work before we start making the connection to setting the table? Why do we need to actually set a table for re-engagement? Well, prior to 2020, we could live in the transactional world. And in fact, here in Calgary, prior to 2014, before we saw an economic downturn, we could focus on, going to work, get paid, exchange for our time and effort, and deal with whatever dissatisfaction or disengagement we might have had by maybe, having a couple extra drinks on our Mexican beach vacation every February. There was times are good, we can live in the transactional world. But then we hit this world pandemic and we had to work differently. We had to manage differently. And I call it the pre-transformation stage. The world of work, as I mentioned before, has changed, but it continues to change and it hasn't fully evolved yet. We're not sure how it will all land. So we are right here. That arrow that I've drawn there is to say that we're in that pre-transformation stage. And we have the opportunity right now to create flexible, inclusive, and productive workplaces. And yet, our organizations are still focusing on transactional pieces, being in the office for a certain amount of time, or policies and procedures that manage that. And they're not really seizing the opportunity to address the transformation that's happened inside of employees coming back, but also in their organizations. And so we're still on that journey, heading towards a new transformed workplace. And if we don't seize that opportunity, and if employers, leaders, teams don't help their teams be prepared, those teams who are not prepared can and will experience any of these things that you see on the screen. Some of you right now on this call might feel a little bit of disengagement, or now what is being called quiet quitting, which if we have time at the end, we'll talk about quiet quitting. But disengagement, some of you have experienced turnover in your organization, or you're feeling a lack of trust, not seeing your organization step up to the plate to manage the changes in the transforming workplace. And those things can lead to poor morale. And if there's a lack of clear direction, you can experience any of those. And some of you on this call today may even be feeling a sense of burnout, not disengagement, but just that bone tired feeling of, I just don't have anything left. And so if we don't manage and we don't set the table for re-engagement, there's a lot of time, cost to your time and the organization, to your productivity and culture, and quite frankly, the bottom line. So now let's move on to our dinner party so we can get into the meat, so to speak, pun intended. So let me ask you this: what makes a fabulous dinner party? When you think about being invited to someone's home, it could be family, friends, maybe you've attended a very formal event through your work or something else. If you were to describe it, what are some of the words you would use to describe it? Feel free to unmute or type in the chat. I think Rosemary is checking the chat function. How would you describe a fabulous dinner party? Any thoughts there, Rosemary, coming in?
None coming in, but I think a fabulous dinner party would involve, good friends and the ability to converse, casually, as well as having several courses, perhaps.
Yeah. So a fabulous dinner party, it's usually well planned and the details are looked after. You feel welcome. You feel comfortable. You know what meal is likely to be served because there's a place setting ready for you, right? And conversely, when you think about a crummy dinner party, something that you didn't feel comfortable at, you thought, this isn't a place I want to be. Why was it crummy? Does anyone want to add to that one? I can't think, I think I've been to one of those, but okay. Typically, if a dinner party isn't going that well, it's because we're uncomfortable, or maybe we don't know how to use all the place settings. or we don't know the people that are there and we're not connected to them in a way that makes us feel welcome. Or our guest completely ignores us and we wonder why we were invited in the first place. So like a good dinner party, it takes effort and preparation to do it well. And re-engaging people takes effort. Who's coming? What's our theme here now that we're back, and what are we actually trying to serve? And we often spend more time planning a party in our home than organizations spend thinking about returning people to work. If I share an example with you, let's say I invite you and your colleague or your significant other to my home for dinner. You say, you know what, we haven't got together for a couple of years. Dress up like we're going out for dinner and come over and we'll have a great meal and just catch up. So you show up at my front door, I open the door, and I'm dressed in a ball gown with gloves and a tiara. And I say, welcome, come on in. And you're in my front entrance, and you and your guest are looking at me going, this is kind of weird. And then I say, come on in. And then I turn my back to you and I leave and I walk into the kitchen. And you're saying, well, what's up with that? I thought she said, come dress for dinner, and she's in a ball gown. And you wonder if I'm coming back, and I'm not coming back. So you peek your head around the corner and you say, wow, there's people dressed in shorts and t-shirts and ball gowns and containers everywhere. What is this? This doesn't make sense. And yet organizations invite people to come back, but don't really lay out what is the meal that we need to be serving and provide the context in which we need to serve it in. And so that example is kind of ridiculous, but we kind of do that. We get the rules and regs about schedules, come back, but then we leave people at the front door. So you got to have a plan. So how are we going to do that? Well, there are 3 key things in order to make this work and to re-engage employees. And I'm going to continue to use the dinner party analogy to keep it simple. 3 things. We want to get the invitation right. Invite people back to work, even if they've been there for a while. Be a good host so that you can focus on relationship and building resilience. And then number 3, set the table. Prepare yourself and others to come back to this transforming workplace. So to walk through these concepts quickly, let's meet 3 dinner guests that are going to help us walk through them. Our first dinner guest is Morgan. Now, Morgan, he's a modern CEO, at least he thinks he is. He's focused, strategic, and he's pretty humble. And he knows it's important to get the invitation back to the office, or even if people are already back, get the invitation right and to re-extend it, because he knows not everybody's still excited to be back, or they might feel unsettled as it's been a bit of a change. He also knows that 36% of Canadians agree that senior managers don't make an effort to even listen, to check in with, or even connect with employees. That's from the Canadian Culture Index of last year. So if you want to keep talent, you've got to have a great invitation. So there's 2 things. If you're an executive like Morgan, you want to be intentional and declare who's invited. And you say, well, what does that mean? Of course, I'm bringing everybody back. I'm inviting them. But that means by treating them as preferred guests, like you would in your home. Remind them why they're important. Remind them about the contribution that they've made to the organization. And in this case, it could be, you know what, you've managed through difficult cost containment things that we've had to do. You've kept our ship afloat, or you've helped increase sales, or you helped us maneuver through that acquisition that we were doing. Whatever it is, or you've consistently performed well and you've helped us grow our business. Whatever it is, treating them like preferred guests by reminding them why they're important and what they've contributed is a first step. It's easy and it's free. And reminding people the value that they can bring and will continue to bring is an important part of the invitation, right? And we're doing that because we want to align to our values and we want to remain our competitive advantage. If you want to get around quiet quitting, you need to let people know why they're important and be specific. And some more practical things that Morgan can do is, if our workspace is being used in a hybrid fashion, making sure that it's simple things like attractive, clean, welcoming. Maybe you have hoteling stations that are helpful for people who aren't always in the office, if that makes sense. You might even want to write a personal note if that makes sense, if that works in your organization. You also want to revisit any corporate values that you have in a meaningful way, not just reading what was on the plaque on the wall, but if you say something like one of your values is people first or our people, then Morgan needs to describe in specific terms what our people means to him and what it can mean to you. And in this analogy, our values are actually our invitation, right? So if I'm sharing with you what our values are now in this new returned workplace, I can hear them, understand if I want to accept this invite or if I need to go somewhere else and sit at a different table, right? The last thing practically that Morgan can do is greet people, be visible. When you know people are in the office on Wednesdays, whatever the cadence is, be visible and make an opportunity with them. Not everybody is happy to be invited back. Some won't want the invitation. So declare who you want on your team. Be thoughtful and purposeful and intentional. Treat them like preferred guests. So Morgan has extended the invitation. Let's move to our second dinner party guest. This is Jason. Now, for Jason, he is a new frontline leader, and he became a frontline leader right at the start of the pandemic. And so it's been a crazy couple of years. And he's hired people and it's been a bit disruptive and they've had to change direction. And he's just trying to keep the team together. But he knows that 60% of Canadians say they'd leave their current job for the same position at another organization for 10% increase, which isn't a lot. So he knows that loyalty is fleeting. And so he wants to be a good host. And in this context, being a good host as a frontline leader or anyone at work leading a team is focusing on nurturing your guests, which is building relationships and resilience. So, when we have people in our home, you don't let one of your guests sit in a corner with an empty wine glass. You want to invite them in, make sure that they're part and connected with other guests, right? And so the way that Jason can do that is by asking questions and checking in regularly. Notice how this isn't rocket science, but in the busyness and chaos of things that we have on our plates, sometimes we can forget. So some key questions that Jason can ask are, hey team, we've been back in the office in this rotating schedule for a while. We have our regular meetings, we check in on our KPIs and all the things that we need to do, but what are some of the things we feel are successes for us right now? What are the strengths that we're seeing come to bear right now? What's missing? What's missing for us? And as a leader, he also needs to have the important but difficult conversations as they arise. Sometimes you have guests who come to the party and spill wine on everybody and maybe don't make themselves welcome. He has to have that conversation to have them leave. And you may have difficult conversations here as a leader, but as a frontline leader, Jason can do those things to be a good host. And the reason he's doing that is because he wants to build relationship and show he cares, which is challenging when people are coming and going on different rotating schedules, potentially. And the why is so that he can help build connection. You can't know what's going on if you don't ask questions, right? And, focusing on successes as well as misses or things that maybe don't energize your team. Part of resilience, in my opinion, is being able to work through things that aren't always energizing to you, right? We all have things we don't love doing, but we need to do them. So working through Jason being a good host, partnering people to help them get through some of those weak points or challenges is a way to build relationship, but also belonging and resilience. Our last dinner party guest is Jen. Now, Jen is an experienced leader and she's managed a team for a long time. And during these last 2 years, she realizes she's ready for a change in her own career. And so she wants to grow her team's capability so that she can move on. And she knows that Morgan has sent out a great invitation. And Jason's working hard to be a good host and maintain connection, belonging, and hopefully build resilience. But Jen's job here is to really actually set the table. And so in this context, it's really about providing the opportunity for her team to know what to do and be able to do it. And so, like any good menu, you want to set the table accordingly, right? You don't wait till your guests arrive to set the table so they know what they're going to have. And in the workplace, that means Jen is really setting the table by talking about what is it that we're focusing on. Yes, we have our goals and all of that, but what is it that we're trying to accomplish this year, this quarter? What are the tools, the technology, and the processes that we're going to need to actually serve this meal? You know, in the past, we had a lot of soup. So our table was always set with soup spoons, but now we're going to eat steak. You can eat steak with a spoon, but it's not that easy, right? So when we talk about tools, technology, and processes, what are the ways we're going to communicate and connect with each other? Are we using Microsoft Teams? Are we using the chat function and that's how we record our meetings? Are we doing it some other way? How are we collaborating? What's the ecosystem that we want to use in our team or our company to make sure we're connecting with people and making sure our table is set correctly? Why are we here? It sounds ridiculous. A lot of people are like, yeah, I know I'm here. I got work to do. I'm clear about my goals. But actually, it's an opportunity for people to know their reason why they're contributing. Why are you here, right? And what are our rules of engagement? One of the first things that I observed as people returned to work was this idea of we're having a team meeting and it's this day of the week and it's a leadership team meeting. We had some people in the room, some people in the building in their office dialing into the meeting and other people at home. So they just needed to work through the rules of engagement. Many organizations are there now, but revisiting them to make sure that everybody's on the same page is useful. And so that place setting is really about making sure everybody knows how things are going to work and revisiting and confirming our outcomes. People never get tired of hearing what it is we're here to do, particularly in an age where it's very easy for people to pick up and leave. If you think about sitting at a table with others when we're dining together, it really is about connection and autonomy. And that's what Jen's role here is, setting the table. We eat dinner together and we connect, but we each have our own set of tools. I don't go and grab someone else's fork to eat my steak, right? So we have connection, but we also want to design autonomy. And the value of that is it provides clarity for people returning to work and to plug back into the work that maybe they're limping along in, or maybe they're just feeling disconnected from, or maybe they're almost burnt out from. And we do this because the real return on investment here is retention, right? We want people to come back, feel clear about what's about to happen or what they need to participate in, and then have the tools or the place setting to do it. So Jen wants to be clear so she can help her people enjoy the meal. So to close off here, before we open it up for questions, here's your checklist. When we think about engaging, re-engaging people, no matter if they've been back for a while or not, like Morgan, we want to refresh and restate values. Whether you're a team lead or maybe you're here as an individual contributor, you might not be restating your values, but thinking about your own and asking your leader about what's our team values. Maybe you've never done that before, but it's a great opportunity to help you re-engage and re-engage others. You know, Morgan also talked about declaring employees' value. So if you're leading a team, let them know what they've contributed. You may have already done this in some formalized evaluation session, but outside of that, having a meaningful conversation about why you're important, and I'm so glad that you stayed with us, helps reaffirm that invitation. And then finally, like Jen, you want to reconfirm these are the things we're working on. And doesn't matter if you're an individual contributor, like I said, a leader, or even leading an organization, reconfirming the direction and what people are doing, even if it changes, is okay, because it helps people have clarity. And when they have clarity, they have confidence. and they don't tend to quiet quit. So how does this beautiful meal end? Well, we've set the table for re-engagement. And what happens after a beautiful meal? How does a beautiful meal typically end? Well, there's usually some anticipation for a fabulous dessert. And dessert, in our analogy of setting the table, really represents culture. Positive culture. It's like a yummy dessert that you want to have more and more of, right? And just like the picture here, it has great layers to it. Values, which Morgan talked about, community and belonging, which Jason is working hard on, being a good host. And that opens up opportunity and growth, the things that Jen is focused on. And so each of those things builds upon each other. So I'll close off by saying this, that bringing employees back to the building is not going to enhance your culture. But setting the table for re-engagement and re-engaging employees will and can at the organizational level if you can retain your talent and you've got a workforce that believes in what they're doing and why, you get that competitive advantage. If you're a leader, setting the table for re-engagement is really about creating belonging and resilience, like tapping into each other to get through hard things, but also to deliver consistent results. And that's when people feel supported and welcomed, like at those parties, right? And finally, at the employee level, it's about providing clarity, right? I know how I can contribute and I have the tools to do it. And I feel good about it because I know that I matter. We all want to feel like preferred guests, just like you are here today. Thank you for taking time to hear what I have to say. But we all want to feel like we're a preferred guest. We all want to be able to contribute to some kind of success, our own or even others. And we all want to have the chance to be part of something worthwhile and have fun. And, in my mind, that's what makes a great dinner party. And it's also what makes a great workplace too. So thank you for listening. And I'm happy to answer questions and have a bit of discussion time because I think we have time to do that. So over to you, Rosemary.
All right. Well, thank you so much. That was great and definitely some good points to think on. I'd like our different guests for really evaluating those points. That's a great way to think about all of them. I hope everyone else got some good ideas from that. So does anybody have any questions?
And even if you don't have a question, it's okay. Is there something that resonated with you or some other related workplace topic you want to ask about? You have a seasoned HR pro that you can ask. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on setting the table.
Well, I think here at Resource YYC, we're always trying to be good hosts. So just reminding ourselves a little about what's around that to help everybody else succeed is always good.
Yeah.
Anybody?
And feel free to unmute if you're not comfortable typing. Feel free to unmute if you have any questions. I'm inviting you.
So we do have a comment in the chat. How employer can approach the quitting of employees because coming back to the office is not an option. So how can an employer approach employees quitting because they don't want to come back?
Well, it's sort of what is the disengagement, asking them why that is. If someone wants to quit, they will quit. But I think it's letting them know the value that they can bring and that it is, that's really what you can do is saying, what is the value that you can bring, letting them know that. And, creating an environment, and it's not an overnight thing, but letting them know why it's important. Just saying, come back to the building is that transactional way of thinking. And there's value in many cases for that. But if that's the only place we are at, You will lose some people just because they've seen a different way of working. You may or may not be able to convince them, but if they are a quality person that you want to have, then you need to remind them of that and invite them and at least let them roll it over as a decision. If someone is quitting purely because of schedule, they may not be the people you want to invite. And I say that cautiously because every situation is different. But if that's their primary reason and it's a disengagement piece, then you want to understand why it's disengaging them to come back, because they at some point may have been disengaged while they were in the office. I hope that helps. Other questions? Comments?
Have you been speaking with a lot of different companies about these options in your consulting?
Yeah. Most organizations that I've worked with have decided on hybrid. And some of them have parts of their organization that have never been in an office. So operationally, it's just continued to be, it's not different. So in the operations, for a lot of people, it's the same. Where we're seeing sort of this, sort of like one of our guests here who asked the question about stopping people from quitting, it's understanding why that's disengaging for people. And typically, it doesn't matter if I work from home or in an office. If I know I'm contributing and it feels good and I can make a contribution, people tend to, it won't matter about that. The commute and all of those things can be a challenge, but it's what I'm seeing is that most of them are working hybrid. They appreciate and want to give people a sense of flexibility. And now it's just working through that. So people have enough connection to collaborate, but enough autonomy to get their work done. So that's what I'm seeing. And it's still up, we're still working through it.
Still some glitches for different people, but
Yeah.
It's understandable. I have heard a lot of companies are doing the at least, 3 days in the office work schedules, right?
Yeah. If you're in an organization, you have the opportunity you're revisiting it, because I think in some of my organizations I'm working with will say, we're going to revisit this in a period of months, not because they're not committed to hybrid working, but does this work? Does it help our goals and our team be ready to achieve the things that we need to do to serve? Because we're doing it in service of something, right? We're not just in a building to do work. So they're revisiting it, periodically to say what makes sense. I had one organization had go 2 days a week to 3 days a week because there's so much happening in that organization in this next few months that they wanted to be together. And the key piece about that is the employees agreed with that, right? So if your employee base can accomplish what they need to and do so remotely and feel like you have some sort of connection and ability to collaborate and deliver results, and they can show you proof of that, then it might be worth trying if you're still trying to think about that. If you've already got past that and you're saying, well, how do we help people really stay connected? Then it's really rinse and repeating what Morgan, Jason, and Jen are doing. It's more important because we just don't walk down the hall 4 days or 5 days a week, right? We are actually managing life and work when we're at home.
Yeah, there definitely can be a disconnect between distractions and of the different types, home and work.
Yeah, yeah. And knowing what disengages your people, right? There's lots of buzzwords out there, like we talk about quiet quitting, but I suspect some of those conditions for people who are managing to expectation, those were there before this, and being at home may have helped them think that through a bit more, or maybe being isolated is help making them retreat. We don't know. So talking to your people and being a good host is probably a really important piece. If you're not doing it, if you're only talking about work, you're not actually getting into how are you doing? How are things? What do we need to do more of as a team? What should we do less of as a team? Those things, you know, you might miss opportunities to create more flexibility. Awesome. Well, if there's no other questions, Rosemary, I'm happy. I don't want to keep people going, but my invitation to anyone here is to certainly you're welcome to check out what we do at Upward HR. And again, I want to thank you for being guests at this little party we've had today. And I hope you found at least one or two things that resonate with you and that you can use going forward. Thanks so much, Rosemary.
Well, thank you. I found it informative, and I hope everybody else did too. And it's always good to adjust our thinking to accommodate others.
Yeah, yeah. It's what most people want and need in order to feel that they can be productive, be clear, and have confidence in the work that they're doing.
Excellent.
Awesome.
Well, have a great day.
You too. Thanks so much, everyone. Take care.